Take a quick pause. Did you know that over 90% of you watching haven't hit the subscribe button yet? If you're enjoying this video, take a second to subscribe and hit the like button. It helps us bring you more gripping stories every day. Also, we'd love to know where you're watching from. Drop your city in the comments so we can see how far our stories are reaching. Your support really keeps us going. Now, let's jump back into the video. Elena sat at the kitchen table staring at the half-empty cup of coffee cooling before her. The morning light slipped through the curtains in thin, golden blades, illuminating the dust motes dancing lazily in the still air. The house was silent except for the soft tick of the clock on the wall and the occasional creak of the old wooden floors. Across from her, the seat was empty, as it had felt for months now, even when her husband Daniel was sitting right there. Marriage was supposed to feel like home, she thought, like comfort, like belonging. Instead, it felt like living with a polite stranger. Their conversations were shallow, practical. Discussions about bills, groceries, schedules, but never about them. The fire that had once burned so brightly between them had dimmed into embers, barely flickering, buried beneath the weight of routine and unspoken disappointment. It wasn't that Daniel was cruel or inattentive. He was kind, stable, responsible. But Elena's heart longed for more, for passion, excitement, for a sense of being alive again. The thought had taken root weeks ago after a late night out with her best friend Mara. They had lingered over wine and whispered conversations in the dim corner of a trendy downtown bar. Mara, as always, had been full of life, laughing with a freedom Elena both admired and envied. Mara spoke openly about her experiences, about how some people, couples even, chose to explore relationships beyond traditional boundaries. "Life's too short to stay numb, Elena," Mara had said, her eyes glittering with mischief. "You deserve to feel alive, to chase what you want. Why trap yourself in a cage you can open any time?" At first, Elena had laughed it off, shocked at the mere suggestion. But Mara's words haunted her, whispering in the back of her mind when she lay awake at night, staring at the ceiling, feeling the vast, cold distance between her and Daniel. It took her days to summon the courage. Even then, as she waited for Daniel to come home from work, she almost backed out. What if he grew angry? What if he laughed at her? Worse, what if he agreed too easily? That evening, Daniel dropped his keys into the bowl by the door and offered her a tired smile. She followed him into the living room, heart hammering wildly, her hands wringing each other anxiously. "I need to talk to you," she said, her voice thinner than she intended. He turned to her, a flicker of concern crossing his face. "Of course, what's wrong?" She didn't know where to start. Every word felt sharp and dangerous, a razor blade poised between them. "I've been feeling stuck," she began carefully. "Like we've lost something important. And I've been thinking a lot about it. About us." Daniel's brows knitted together, his body tensing slightly, but he didn't interrupt. "I was wondering—" She hesitated, the weight of her next words threatening to crush her. "What if we opened our marriage just for a while? To see other people, explore, maybe it would help us find ourselves again. Or figure out what we really want." The words hung in the air, heavier than she could bear. She waited for the explosion. Anger, shock, hurt. But none came. Daniel stood there, silent for a long moment. Then he simply nodded, almost too calmly. "If that's what you think you need," he said quietly, "I'll move into the spare room tonight." It wasn't the reaction she had expected. She had prepared herself for a fight, for messy tears, anything but this measured surrender. She felt the strange sensation of the ground shifting under her feet, leaving her unmoored. That night, Elena listened to the faint sounds of Daniel moving his things down the hall. The spare room door clicked shut softly, and with it, something inside her heart trembled. Days blurred together after that. Daniel was distant, polite but detached. They lived like roommates. Brief nods in the hallway, curt exchanges about schedules, awkward silences at breakfast. It both hurt and freed her, as if a door she didn't even know she had locked had suddenly swung open. Mara, thrilled by Elena's boldness, immediately set about encouraging her. "You've taken the first step," Mara said over coffee one afternoon. her excitement contagious. Now you need to live it. Don't waste this. Go after what you want. There was one man who immediately came to mind. Someone Elena had spent too many stolen glances at during late meetings and office parties. His name was Lucas, a colleague from the marketing department. Charming, confident, always flashing that easy smile that made her stomach twist in unexpected ways. She couldn't deny the attraction had been there long before she ever voiced her discontent to Daniel. She had buried it deep, telling herself it was harmless, meaningless. But now, with the rules rewritten, the temptation grew stronger. It was Mara who convinced her to act. "Text him," she said simply. "Invite him for coffee, see where it leads." Elena's fingers trembled as she typed the message. Casual, innocent on the surface. She stared at the screen for a full minute before hitting send. Lucas responded almost immediately. "I'd love to." Their first meeting outside of work felt illicit, a secret blooming between them. They sat at a quiet table in a small cafe tucked away from downtown's busy streets. Lucas was easy to talk to, warm, attentive in a way that made her feel seen, desired. His compliments were subtle but heavy with meaning, and every brush of his hand, every lingering glance, set her nerves on fire. As the weeks passed, Elena found herself slipping deeper into the new world she had opened. She met Lucas again. And again. Dinners that stretched into long, winding conversations. Walks where their arms would brush too often to be accidental. The pull between them grew stronger, harder to deny. Meanwhile, at home, Daniel grew quieter. His smiles became rare, his laughter non-existent. She caught him once, standing in the doorway of the spare room, just looking at her as if trying to memorize her. She had opened her mouth to speak, to explain something she herself didn't fully understand, but the words never came. He simply turned away. There was a part of Elena that wanted to stop, to pull back, to rebuild the bridge between them, but another, louder part, the part that had felt dead inside for too long, but wanted to chase the new feeling, the thrilling sense of possibility, of rediscovery. She didn't notice how Daniel began leaving earlier for work, how he stopped texting to check in during the day. She didn't notice the empty spaces growing between them, widening like cracks in the foundation of a crumbling house. Mara continued to cheer her on, suggesting new adventures, new experiences. "You're finally living for yourself," she said with a wink. And Elena believed her. She didn't see the shadow growing in Daniel's eyes. She didn't hear the silent ways his heart was breaking. She was too busy chasing a freedom she thought would save her. But some freedoms came at a price, and Elena was about to find out just how high it could be. The days turned into weeks, and Elena's world seemed to split into two separate lives. By day, she moved through her routine with Daniel, brief, cordial interactions about dinner plans and chores. But by night, she entered a different reality, one where laughter and excitement bloomed freely, where her heart raced at the anticipation of a text, a look, a meeting. Lucas became her escape, her secret world. He had a way of making her feel like she was the only person in the room, the only thought in his mind. With him, she remembered what it was like to feel desirable, seen, craved. Their meetings were still careful, subtle. A coffee here, a long drive there, lingering conversations that made her cheeks flush with something she hadn't felt in years. She told herself it was harmless, that she and Daniel had agreed to this. But deep inside, an uneasy feeling began to twist in her chest. Small at first, easy to ignore. At home, Daniel kept his distance, honoring the agreement without complaint or question. He still fixed the broken door hinge when it squeaked, still shoveled the snow from the driveway when winter deepened its grip on their small neighborhood. But the warmth was gone, replaced by a cold civility that chilled Elena far more than any December wind. There were nights she would hear him moving around the house long after she had gone to bed, the soft creak of floorboards and the quiet sighs of someone who could not find rest. Once she passed him in the hallway late at night. Their eyes met for a moment, his tired and unreadable, hers, caught between guilt and defiance. Neither spoke. He stepped aside silently, allowing her to pass, and the moment faded into the countless other silences they now shared. Elena buried herself deeper into her new life. Encouraged by Mara, she allowed herself to meet new people, attending gatherings and small parties she would have once avoided. She told herself she was just experiencing life, reclaiming parts of herself she had lost somewhere along the way. But with each step she took away from Daniel, a small voice inside her grew louder, whispering questions she was not ready to face. One evening, Lucas invited her to an art exhibit downtown. The gallery was lit in soft, golden hues, the air filled with low conversation and the scent of expensive wine. Lucas moved beside her with easy confidence, his hand occasionally brushing the small of her back in a way that sent shivers up her spine. "You're different tonight," he said quietly as they stood before a large, abstract painting. "Happier, lighter." Elena smiled, but it felt brittle. She wondered if he could see the cracks beneath the surface. They lingered long after the crowd had thinned, talking about dreams and regrets, about places they wanted to visit, lives they wanted to live. For a while, Elena allowed herself to believe that she was truly free, untethered from the weight of her old life. When Lucas leaned in, his forehead resting briefly against hers in a tender gesture, Elena felt a rush of emotion so strong it left her dizzy. She closed her eyes and let herself believe just for a moment that everything would be all right. But reality had a way of finding her. She returned home late, the house shrouded in darkness. As she slipped inside, careful not to make noise, she noticed Daniel's coat missing from its usual hook by the door. The spare room was empty, his phone charger gone from the nightstand. A cold prickle ran down her spine. The next morning, Daniel was back, moving through the kitchen with the same quiet efficiency as always. But something about him had changed. His eyes, when they met hers briefly, were harder, more distant. The polite mask he wore was still in place, but underneath it, Elena sensed something deeper. A withdrawal so complete it made her heart ache. She wanted to ask him where he had been, what he had done, but the words died on her tongue. She had no right, not after what she herself had been doing. Instead, they moved around each other like ghosts inhabiting the same space, but living separate lives. Mara continued to push her further. "You're finally taking control," she said one afternoon over lunch. "You deserve happiness. If Daniel can't give you what you need, why should you feel guilty?" Elena nodded, but her chest felt tight. Somewhere deep inside, she knew this wasn't just about Daniel. It was about something broken inside herself, something she had hoped new experiences could fix. Lucas wasn't the only one drawn to her. She noticed other glances, lingering smiles from strangers, attention she hadn't felt in years. Part of her thrilled at the realization, at the idea that she could still attract, still captivate. It became a drug, a dangerous temptation she found harder to resist with each passing day. And yet, with every new adventure, every whispered conversation in the dark, she felt herself slipping further from the life she had once built with Daniel. The life that now felt so far away it was almost unrecognizable. One evening, after another gathering Mara had pulled her into, Elena returned home to find Daniel sitting at the kitchen table, a glass of water in front of him, untouched. He didn't look up when she entered, didn't acknowledge her at all. The silence stretched painfully between them. Finally, unable to bear it, Elena spoke. "Are you okay?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Daniel looked at her then, really looked at her, and the sadness in his eyes was a weight that nearly crushed her. "I'm fine," he said simply, turning his gaze back to the window. But he wasn't fine. She knew it. She could feel it in the way the air around him seemed heavier now, colder. The man she had loved, the man who had once been her whole world, was slipping away, and she was the one letting go of the rope. That night, Elena lay awake staring at the ceiling, just as she had all those months ago. But now, instead of feeling trapped, she felt lost, adrift in a sea of her own making. The new life she had wanted so badly suddenly felt less like freedom and more like exile. She reached for her phone out of habit, half expecting a message from Lucas, something to distract her from the growing ache in her chest. But there was nothing, only silence. Outside the window, snow began to fall in soft, silent drifts, covering the world in a fragile, temporary peace. Elena closed her eyes, but sleep would not come. Instead, she lay there haunted by the choices she had made, by the chasm she had carved between herself and the man who had once been her everything. The next morning, Daniel was gone before she woke up. No note, no message, just an empty house and a silence so thick it felt suffocating. Elena sat at the kitchen table, the same table where months ago she had dared to suggest opening their marriage. She traced the grain of the wood with her fingertip, remembering the look in Daniel's eyes that night, the quiet resignation, the sadness he had tried so hard to hide. She thought she was giving them both a chance to find happiness. But now, as she sat alone in the cold morning light, she wasn't sure what she had found at all. All she knew was that something precious had been broken, something that might never be whole again. And the worst part was, the consequences of her choices were only just beginning to unfold. The winter deepened, and with it, the distance between Elena and Daniel became almost unbearable. Days slipped by in a blur, each one colder than the last, not because of the weather, but because of the emptiness that had taken root in the house. The silence was no longer just between them. It lived in the walls, in the floorboards, in the very air she breathed. Daniel barely spoke anymore. He came, home late, sometimes not at all. When he was home, he stayed shut away in the spare room or spent hours sitting silently in front of the television without really watching. Elena would sometimes hear him on the phone. Low conversations he quickly ended when she came near. He was disappearing right before her eyes, and she didn't know how to stop it. She kept telling herself that this was what she had asked for: freedom, independence, a chance to rediscover herself. But it didn't feel like freedom anymore. It felt like abandonment. Mara tried to reassure her. "You knew there would be growing pains," she said one afternoon over coffee. "He'll come around. Men always do once they realize they can't control everything." Elena nodded, but the words rang hollow in her ears. She hadn't wanted to control Daniel. She hadn't wanted to hurt him. Somewhere along the way, she had convinced herself that they were both trapped, both yearning for something more. But now, staring at the pieces of her broken marriage, she realized she might have been wrong. And it wasn't just Daniel slipping away. Lucas, too, had started to pull back. The once constant messages now came sporadically, his invitations fewer and far between. When they did meet, there was a new edge to his demeanor, a restlessness, a distracted air. One evening, after a strained dinner, he finally said what Elena had been dreading. "This isn't sustainable," he told her, not unkindly. "You're married, Elena. You have a life I can't be part of." "Not really." She sat there, stunned, as he reached across the table and briefly squeezed her hand before letting it go. The finality of the gesture left her breathless. Lucas wasn't her future. He had never promised to be. He had been a distraction, a beautiful, thrilling escape. But that was all. She had opened a door hoping for a new life, but now she realized she had only wandered deeper into loneliness. The drive home that night was a blur. Snow battered her windshield, the wipers struggling to keep up. Streetlights blurred into long smears of gold and white. By the time she pulled into the driveway, she felt hollow, like a house abandoned after a storm. Daniel's car was there, but the house was dark. She stepped inside quietly, the air thick with the familiar scent of home. And something else. Something heavier. She found him in the living room, sitting on the couch, a packed duffel bag at his feet. Her heart dropped. "Daniel?" she whispered. He looked up at her, and for a moment she saw flashes of the man she had fallen in love with. The man who had once made her laugh until she cried, who had danced with her barefoot in the kitchen, who had held her hand through sleepless nights and whispered promises of forever. But that man was fading fast, buried beneath hurt and disappointment. "I can't do this anymore, Elena," he said, his voice low but steady. "I thought I could. I thought maybe if I gave you space, you'd find your way back to me, but I realize now I was just delaying the inevitable." Her throat tightened. She tried to speak, but the words wouldn't come. "I'm not angry," he continued. "I'm just tired. Tired of pretending we're okay when we're not. Tired of living with someone who's already gone." Tears blurred her vision, but she blinked them away. She needed to be strong. She needed to fix this. "Daniel, please," she said, taking a step toward him. We can figure this out." He smiled sadly, shaking his head. You made your choice, he said softly. You chose excitement over stability, newness over history. I don't blame you. Maybe I failed you in ways I'll never fully understand, but I can't keep standing here waiting for a version of you that doesn't exist anymore. The duffel bag felt like a death knell. Where will you go? She asked, her voice trembling. Somewhere I can breathe, he said simply. He stood slinging the bag over his shoulder. For a moment he hesitated, as if waiting for her to say something, anything, that could undo the past few months. But there was nothing left to say. He walked past her, pausing briefly at the door. Take care of yourself, Elena, he said quietly. And then he was gone. The door closed with a soft click that echoed through the house like a gunshot. Elena stood frozen, staring at the empty space where he had been. She waited for the denial to set in, for the anger, the outrage. But all she felt was a deep, aching sorrow that rooted her to the spot. Days passed, then weeks. Christmas came and went, a hollow shell of a holiday. The house, once filled with laughter and arguments and life, now felt like a museum, each room a monument to what had been lost. Mara kept reaching out, encouraging her to move on, to embrace her new freedom. But the thought of starting over made Elena's stomach twist. She didn't want new adventures anymore. She wanted the life she had taken for granted, the man she had driven away. Sometimes at night, she would pick up her phone, staring at Daniel's contact information. Her fingers would hover over the call button, but she never pressed it. What could she say? How could she possibly explain the damage she had done? One evening, desperate for some kind of connection, she drove past the small apartment complex where she knew Daniel's sister lived. His car was parked outside. She sat there in the car, watching the windows glow warmly from within, imagining Daniel inside, trying to piece his life back together. It hit her then with brutal clarity. Some things once broken could not be repaired. Trust, once shattered, left jagged edges that cut deeper than any argument ever could. She had believed that opening their marriage would set them both free. But all it had done was unleash a storm neither of them had been prepared for. There were no villains in their story, no grand betrayals, just two people who loved each other once, who lost their way, and who paid the price for choices made in moments of weakness and longing. The finality of it all settled into her bones. Elena returned home to the empty house. She curled up on the couch where Daniel had once kissed her forehead, whispered dreams into her ear. She clutched a throw blanket to her chest, breathing in the faint, fading scent of him. She wasn't angry. She wasn't even bitter. She was simply heartbroken. As she sat there, the snow falling thick and silent outside the window, she realized that some doors once opened could never truly be closed again. And some hearts once broken never quite healed the same way. She had wanted to feel alive again, to chase the thrill of something new. Instead, she had lost the one thing that had ever truly mattered. And the saddest part of all was knowing she had no one to blame but herself. The house creaked softly around her, settling into the night. Elena closed her eyes, letting the quiet consume her, a silent penance for the choices she could never undo. In the end, it wasn't betrayal or anger that destroyed them. It was the slow, quiet erosion of love, worn away by loneliness, by longing, and by the false promise of freedom. And now she would have to live with the emptiness she had created. A hollow echo of a life that could have been, if only she had realized too late what truly mattered.